I think we have a computer we could sell 1,000 a month of. How can you sell 1,000 a month, you know?
But we needed some money for tooling the case and things like that. We needed a few $100,000.
That was a lot of money for two people who had nothing in their lives to speak of, didn't have a $400 bank account.
So I went looking for some venture capital.
The scruffy 19-year-old seduced the conservative world of venture capitalists. The man Jobs persuaded to part with his cash was Arthur Rock, the inventor of venture capital and the man who had originally funded Intel. At least the Intel boys had graduated from university and owned suits.
Well, he wore sandals, and he had very long hair and beard and mustache, but very articulate. He was, I think at one time in his life, and it was probably when I first met him, that he ate nothing but fruit.
So as a mainline venture capitalist, this is
not the norm. This is not the norm.
With money in hand and under occasional adult supervision from an ex-Intel manager named Mike Markkula, Woz and Jobs finished the Apple II and ordered a local factory to build 1,000 machines.
2 years passed between the Altair and the Apple II, and in that time a lot of things changed. We went from a computer that was designed for hobbyists and engineers and certainly looked like a piece of test equipment to a computer that looked like a piece of consumer electronics. And we can thank Steve Jobs for that. His sense of design demanded that this structural foam case be used for the Apple II, the first case of its type on a personal computer. And not that there wasn't good engineering inside either. The Apple II was a model of efficient engineering. Here's the floppy disk drive controller, for example. There are 8 chips here where previously there would have been 35. This is an amazing bit of engineering that we can attribute to Steve Wozniak, who was certainly the Mozart of digital design. And all told, it turned the Apple II into a sensation.
The Apple II was launched at Jim Warren's West Coast Computer Fair, one of the first big microcomputer shows. The 1978 show drew thousands of attendees and dozens of exhibitors, many of them members of the Homebrew Computer Club, which spawned most of the early microcomputer companies. But there was only one company showing something that looked like a modern personal computer. Right by the entrance, in a prime spot negotiated by Steve Jobs, sat the Apple II. It mesmerized all who saw it.
My recollection is we stole the show. And a lot of dealers and distributors started lining up, and we were off and running.
How old were you?
21.
21.
Yeah.
Fire up the Chevy and drive out to the beach.
Following the West Coast Computer Fair, the next 2 years were ones of explosive growth for Apple, with thousands of customers arriving on the doorstep of the tiny office in Cupertino, California. Sales and profits grew so quickly that Apple had more money than the company could spend. And the company was very young. The founders were in their 20s, and some employees were even younger, like 14-year-old Chris Espinoza, who never left. He still works at Apple almost 20 years later.
There would be public demonstrations of our product every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And that was good because it was after school. So I would get out of my, sophomore, junior year of high school. I would ride my little moped down to the Apple offices, and at 3 o'clock I'd give the demonstrations of the Apple II.
When we were in the office, it was, hey, jokes and wiring up people's phones to do weird things, just every one of us. I mean, there wasn't a person in Apple, I don't think, for a couple of years that was, super serious. We were lucky. We had, like, the hot product of its day.
And some of the people that I did original demos to came up to me years later and said, I founded a $100 million chain of computer stores based on the demo you showed me one Tuesday afternoon at Apple. It's really fun.
It went so successful that all of a sudden, Steve and I wouldn't have to worry about work for the rest of our lives. And then it got even more successful and more successful after that. And it was sort of a shock.
The Apple II set a new standard for personal computers and showed there was some real money to be made. Rival companies popped up all over, but the market was still hobbyists. Guys with big beards who thought a good use for their computer was controlling a model train set.
Loads in the actual program.
But for microcomputers to be taken seriously, they had to start doing things that needed doing, functions that were useful, not just for fun.
Over 2,000 programs with
The enthusiast market had its limits. To reach the rest of us, the Apple II needed what nerds call a killer application, software that's so useful that people will buy computers just to run it. For the Apple II, this application was called VisiCalc. It came straight from the blackboards of the Harvard Business School. Invented by a graduate student, Dan Bricklin, with his programmer friend Bob Frankston, VisiCalc was the first electronic spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is a tool for financial planning, bringing together for the first time the seduction of money with the power of microcomputing. Dan Bricklin's professor at Harvard showed how companies used a grid of numbers on a blackboard to work out profits and expenses.
60 down here, and your profit would be this minus this, which gives you 40. And then, well, let's see, what's the sales growth? We'll say there's a 10%.
The trick to a spreadsheet is that all the values in the table are related to the others. So changes in one year would ripple through the table, affecting prices and profits in subsequent years. Students were asked to calculate how future profits would be affected by various business scenarios. It was called running the numbers, and they did it laboriously, by hand.
Well, let's say your initial costs have 100 fixed cost at the beginning, so now you have a minus 20 is how much you make the first year. And then the second year you have 100, but your variable, let's say, is 25. So now you're losing, what is it? There's a pain in the neck. I wasn't very good at this stuff. 80, what? No.
We failed.
15.
We just lost.
Minus 15, right? And then eventually you're making money. What year do we make money? And and how much does the cost of money? That's what running the numbers was.
Because each value was linked to the others, one mistake could mean disaster.
It blows all your numbers afterwards because you make all your calculations based on other numbers before them. If I had miscalculated...
Dan, who had worked as a programmer, started daydreaming about how he could use a computer to replace the tedious hand calculations.
I imagined that there was this magic blackboard that did like word processing does word wrapping. If you make a change to a word, it automatically pulls everything back. Well, why not recalculate the same way? So that if I changed my number, I should have used 10% instead of 12%. I could just put it in and it would recalculate everything, go through it. And that would be this idea of electronic spreadsheet.
Following a model that's common today, Dan Bricklin designed the program, but got his friend Bob Frankston to write the actual computer code. After months of programming late at night, when computer time was cheaper, the Harvard Business School blackboard came to life.
Now we've set this up, okay? Then we type a new value in, okay? Here I'm going to take that 100, and I'm going to change it, right? And here, it recalculated. Whoa! That saved me so much time.
People who saw it and went and got it, like an accountant, I remember showing it to one around here, and he started shaking and said, "That's what I do all week. I could do it in an hour. What I could do, and they would take their credit cards and shove them in your face." I meet these people now, they come up to me and say, "I got to tell you, it's...
You changed my life.
Changed my life. You made accounting fun." And
you have to remember what it was like in those days. We did not use the word spreadsheet because nobody knew what a spreadsheet was. I came up with the name Visible Calculator, or VisiCalc, because you wanted to emphasize that aspect.
VisiCalc hit the market in October 1979, selling for $100. Marv Goldschmidt sold the first copies from his computer store in Bedford, Massachusetts. After a slow start, VisiCalc took off.
What it did in our society, it gave people who were obsessed with numbers, whether they're in business or at home, how much am I worth today? What's my stock portfolio worth? How am I doing against budget on this project? It gave them the ability to play with scenarios and change it and say, well, what if I do this? So put people, in a sense, in control of the thing that lots of people in our society feel is driving them, and that's numbers.
The spreadsheet was every businessman's crystal ball. It answered all those what-if questions. What if I fire the engineering department? What if I invest $10 million in pantyhose futures? Look, I'll be rich in under a year and have slimmer thighs at the same time. The computer says so.
$5 up 25!
The effect of the spreadsheet was enormous. Armed with an Apple II running VisiCalc, a 24-year-old MBA with 2 pieces of dubious data could convince his corporate managers to allow him to loot the corporate pension fund and do a leverage buyout. It was the perfect tool for the 80s, the me decade, when money was everything and greed was good.
The money seemed limitless.
Investments, cash flow.
The whiz kids, many fresh out of college, drawn here by the lure of big money.
Estimates.
He'd made millions for himself and others selling junk bonds.
Forecasts or plans.
A group that has been motivated by greed.
Calc can help you work faster.
In 5 years, the PC had gone from a hobbyist's toy to an engine that shaped the times we lived in. Thanks to VisiCalc, the Apple II made history.
Everybody you talked to just seemed excited about talking about what we were doing. And there was this huge media explosion, kind of like the internet is receiving today, of this is the happening thing. You read about it over and over and over, and every time you took an airplane flight, you read about it. And every newspaper, every week, you'd read something about small computers coming, and Apple was one of the highlight companies. So we were being portrayed as a leader of a revolution, and we really felt that we were a leader of a revolution. We were going to change life a lot.
Pretty good for a company started in a garage 3 years before. But not all the PC pioneers made great fortunes. Dan Bricklin decided not to patent his spreadsheet idea. Though more than 100 million spreadsheets have been sold since 1979, Bricklin and Frankston haven't earned VisiCalc royalties in years.
You know, looking back at how successful a lot of other people have been, it's kind of sad that we weren't as successful.
It would be very nice to be gazillionaires, but it can also understand that part of the reason was that that's not what we're trying to be.
We're kids of the 60s. And what did you want to do? You wanted to make the world better. And you wanted to make your mark on the world and improve things. And we did it. So by the mark of what we would measure ourselves by, we're very successful.
Yes.
And what about Ed Roberts? 3 years and 40,000 computers after assembling that first Altair, the fun was over for Ed. MITS was just another player in what had become a competitive market for personal computers. Roberts sold his company in 1978 and started a new life. He went back to his native Georgia and retrained as a doctor.
I hadn't really thought anything at all about it until the last few years when people started taking credit for things that we did at MITS. And that's the only thing I think about it. It irritates me, the things that we did at MITS and we took all the heat for, that other people have tried to take credit for. And that frustrates me.
While Ed Roberts invented the personal computer, it was the founders of Apple who got rich. When Apple went public in spectacular fashion in 1980, Jobs and Woz became multi-millionaires. The nerds had inherited the earth.
I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money.
It was just a little hobby company like a lot of people do, not thinking anything of it. I mean, it wasn't like we both thought it was going to go a long ways. It was like, we'll both do it for fun. But back then, there was a short window in time where one person who could sit down and do some neat, good designs could turn them into a huge thing like the Apple II.
It's astonishing that at the beginning of 1975, nobody owned a personal computer. All there was a mock-up on a magazine cover. Yet within 5 years, there had emerged here in Silicon Valley a billion-dollar industry. An unhealthy fascination with technology on the part of a few adolescents had awakened the nerd within us all. PC companies were sprouting like mushrooms to meet the enormous demand. Apple had emerged as the top fungus and had taken 50% of the market. To the boys in Cupertino, every day seemed like Christmas. But Scrooge was around the corner. There was a company that everyone associated with the word computer, a company that expected, no, demanded to dominate its market, IBM. Big Blue was on the move, and Silicon Valley would soon be feeling the reverberations.